at present. See, we want to get it to become on this blue line and start ascending back up to a state, at least of what Rousseau and them thought was a state of nature, the noble, savage state, but no longer primitive, but noble, in that we no longer perpetrate vast horrors and inhumanities. So the key turning points to getting up here, and I hope if you're going to be awake for any of this, be awake at this point, is we got to go through two main points. Well, we got to go through one main point, which is really short initials called GCD. This is an existing political program that came out of the Eisenhower and Kennedy era. It stands for, can anyone tell me, I give this GCD test from time to time, can anyone tell me what GCD meant in diplomatic usage in the 50s and 60s?
Tell us, please.
Well, you should be ashamed of yourself.
I'm not. Tell us.
It stands for general and complete disarmament. Usually it's capitalized, but it was the basis of negotiations both under Eisenhower and later under Kennedy, which gave rise under Kennedy to a document known as the McCloy-Zorin Agreement, which specified the rules between the Soviets and us for negotiating. Now pick up on this. There was a broad diplomatic practice then in negotiations under the 18-nation disarmament conference to negotiate the total disarmament of the world, to close the Pentagon, to cut off all budgeting for military, to cut off all call-up for people, to disband existing standing armies, and to do things, recycling things to all the tanks and boats and missiles and stuff. That stuff actually, and President Kennedy spoke about that twice.
And then he got killed.
In his career. Well, that's quite to the point. He talked about the UN, he talked about it in June for the graduation of American youth, and then he got killed. Some say it's because he's trying to, cancel the ATF contract. Some say it's because he's messing with the banking system. Some say it's because of the monsters.
We don't know. A lot of people have the possible motive for doing it, and we may never get to the bottom of it.
Okay, we've got to say,
yes, we have. We've got
8 minutes, so I
it's out.
I gotta close this out. So you asked me, how do we turn the corner? How do we make our spaceship go back up to this nice place? Well, we start to figure out how to implement something like what Eisenhower and Kennedy were talking about at the very moment that Kennedy was killed. That's the hardcore political program. That will get us to a new civilization which is demilitarized. Prior to that, we got to have a grassroots build-up for that, which this might be an instance case of. And then the vehicle that can help us do it, this is my little invention, is you take this, you think of the museum out here in the future, like the world, and this might be the several generations up the road, but one day when we get back up here, and perhaps they're going to even more, to very utopian levels of superhumanity. That's what these upper arrows mean. There's also a hint here that it could drop down again. That is, it could rearm and recollapse and repeat this cycle. But let us assume that it's just going to keep going up nicely. And in that period, people will build a museum, and it will show artifacts from this era and the era forward of the whole program to coerce governments to sit down and give us general and complete disarmament. The demonstrations, perhaps the State Department, the documents and the protocols created for that, they will all become in the archival repose of this museum. Now, here's the feedback mechanism. Now that museum, which might be 102 or 500 years in the future, the real one made out of marble and looking like the Pantheon, but right down here, today, see, I've declared this a document in the museum. I'm already an archivist for the Museum of the Millennium. I just decided today, for the first time, that I'm going to number this one in the early series of documents and archives.
What an idea for the architecture of the Museum of the Millennium.
Oh, great.
Most cultures in their architecture have columns or pillars. The Pantheon, obviously, is the archetype of that. but the cultures of the ancient Middle East, of medieval Europe, of the Orient, and of the indigenous Americans, all have pillars and columns. So why not use a computer program? You put in all of the existing designs of pillars and columns, then you create a bunch of so-called morphed in-between columns that partake of these existing column designs, and then string them out like 100 columns, 200 columns in a colonnade, and it's a huge structure that's made up of architectural elements from all of the...
Albert Spear was involved.
Would you say, the architectural advisory committee for the
Sure.
I would think you would get it.
Now, let's get back away from the architect for a second here. We're dealing with a social situation, man. We are basically a very dynamically minded entity as individuals and also as, you might say collectively, as a you want to call it a global community. And one of the things that I've always wondered is that we're in a process, like in this country, we're like the last, I would say we're like the last post of being able to have, you know, protecting, so to speak, the right of individual thought and, you know, choice. And right now we're in the process of trying to break that. We have people who say what you can eat, what you can drink, what you can wear, what you can smoke or drive. That's controlling. Remember what George Orwell talked about in 1984? Well, it's 1994. We're not that far away from that. If we don't stop it where it's at the core, so to speak. The core is in government. Think of the word government. What does that word mean? It means control mind.
No.
Control money.
Mental is mind.
No, I just announced that.
Do you think the
Well, yeah, you got to look at it that way, though. You got to look at it that way. But we want to control because people don't feel. People don't think the government feel like they have control.
Orwell was concerned with the Stalinist state. He was scared of Stalin. Animal Farm in 1984 imagined that England and Europe, Western Europe, would be a competing Stalinist type of state. Well, that whole system has collapsed. I'm not saying that.
Economically, but no
I am not saying that we are in the long term in a better position. We may not be, but you know, especially Zhirinovsky goes back into power in Russia. You know, you have another dictatorial regime. But that was all he was concerned about, and I really don't think that what he was writing about is really on all fours of what we are faced up with against right now.
No, it's not. It's not complete. You're right about that.
I think
Get the government out of controlling our lives.
If you're asking, in my opinion, how it fits in here, it is as follows. First of all, the fact that there's a collapse into this petty infighting amongst us humans, the petty repressions, the political correctitude, and the various racial repressions are very real, pandemic racial religious repressions. A key reason for that is because virtually, well, actually everybody nearly it knows quite consciously and profoundly deeply in their bones that we're on a highway to hell in a handbasket, and we don't know what to do about it. And various people are trying to find out, well, who is causing this? Well, it's those people who practice sex, or well, it's those people out there beating their Bible all day long, or you know, it's the vegetarians doing it all.
I know.
So the salient point is that, look, if we would all just do what I do, I mean, I'm a Kantian, you know, Kant had that wonderful idea of, you know, so behave that if everybody else behaved the same way, the world would be peachy keen.
Right.
And I say, hey, gang, if everybody would get on this bandwagon, you know, let's get us back up here to the post-military era.
Yeah, but the problem that Kant forgot.
Excuse me, I will go for the option. this for his very real concerns about petty and major repressions is that it's symptomatic. It's everybody trying to pin the nail on a donkey that somebody else is leading us to hell in a handbasket, but nobody in this room, I examined all the literature, none of that wonderful, marvelous literature talks about turning our time ship back up here. In other words, going through a general demilitarization. Hey, I'll give you everything about virtual reality you want to know. I'll give you everything about, big codexes of people's names that have exotic sounding groups about the ecology and, groups about everything advanced and far out. But this is very important. There's a big compendium book out here for sale that I examined. It doesn't have one article in there in advocacy of the general and complete scourging away of our main parasitic presence on planet, the military.